kind of wild, right? Like one minute we're watching Hurricane Helene unfold, and the next it's all about politics and who's going to pay for what.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a bit of a powder keg, isn't it? Disaster relief, I mean, suddenly everyone's got an opinion on where the money should go, how fast it should get there.
Exactly. And this whole thing with House Speaker Mike Johnson's CBS interview, talk about adding fuel to the fire. So we wanted to deep dive into that a bit, break down what he said, and maybe bring some clarity to the chaos. Basically, he came out swinging, right? Said Congress doesn't need to rush back to pass more hurricane relief funding,
Right, his stance is that FEMA's got enough to handle this.
which he's basing on that $20 billion Congress approved right before Helene hit, I guess.
Exactly. So in his mind, there's no immediate crisis, at least from a funding standpoint.
But then you got Margaret Brennan, the interviewer, pointing out what the FEMA director himself said, that $9 billion of that is already earmarked for, well, this hurricane. So, like, who do we believe?
Yeah. And that's where it gets tricky, right? Because Johnson's counterargument is that, yeah, it's earmarked, but it's not actually in people's hands yet. He even threw out a stat, said less than 2% of that $20 billion has been distributed.
Which, okay, fair point. Even if you think he's playing a bit of a numbers game, obligated isn't the same as money spent. I get it.
Exactly. Just so our listeners understand, the money's promised,
Right.
essentially, but the actual process of getting it where it needs to go, well, that takes time.
I think even people critical of the slow and steady approach would acknowledge.
Yeah.
But still, Johnson kind of doubles down, even implies FEMA's dragging their feet, you know?
Yeah.
Like they're the problem.
And that's where this whole thing becomes about way more than just the budget, you know? It's political now. Remember earlier this week, the whole thing with the Homeland Security Secretary saying FEMA needed more money, then backtracking?
Yeah, like pick a lane, guys.
Yeah.
Talk about mixed messages.
Totally. And then, of course, you've got Trump and his allies jumping into the fray, right? Suddenly there are claims about hurricane relief being diverted to migrant care, which is...
Whole other can of worms.
Yeah, exactly. And while those claims have been debunked, it just adds another layer of distrust, doesn't it? Like now it's not just about whether FEMA has enough, but if they're even using it for what they're supposed to.
It's a mess. So on the one side, you've got folks saying, hold your horses, let's be strategic. And on the other, it's all, people are hurting now, red tape be damned. So where does that leave us?
Well, Johnson's main point seems to be that states need to figure out their damage, you know, do their assessments before Congress throws more money at the problem.
Which on the surface sounds, responsible.
Yeah.
But when it's a crisis this big, does that system, the way it's set up, really work? What if a state's just totally swamped and can't get those assessments done fast enough? What happens to the people who need help now? It's like, damned if you do, damned if you don't, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the tension, right? How do we balance doing things by the book with getting things done, like yesterday? How do we make sure aid's being used properly, but also make sure it reaches the people who need it fast enough to make a difference? It's a question that's haunted disaster relief forever, it seems like.
And it makes you think, is this whole let's wait and see approach really smart in a situation like this? I mean, every hour counts when people are hurting, right?
No question. Every single day that goes by means more people without a roof over their heads, without clean water. The basics.
Yeah.
And the longer it takes to get them help, the worse it gets.
It's like sometimes trying to be careful, trying to be, fiscally responsible ends up costing more in the end. Not just money, but like human cost,
Yeah, and that's the thing about disaster response, right? It's this balancing act. You have to think about the immediate needs, obviously, but then there's also the long game. How do we rebuild in a way that actually lasts?
Right. And that's what gets lost in these political food fights, isn't it? Like, we're talking about real people, real lives turned upside down. It's not just numbers on a spreadsheet.
It's so easy to forget that, isn't it? The family that lost their home, the business owner who might lose everything they've worked for. That's what's at stake here.
It's easy to get numb to the statistics,
Yeah.
But then you hear those individual stories and it hits you the very real cost of these disasters.
Exactly. And it reminds us why this whole conversation, this whole debate about FEMA and disaster relief, why it matters so much. It's about getting help to the people who need it most, when they need it most.
This CBS interview, whatever you think of Johnson, it really highlights how complicated all of this is, doesn't it? This isn't just about one hurricane, right? This is like an ongoing thing.
Oh, absolutely. And you see that tension playing out here. The folks who say, just do something now, and the ones who are all about, wait, let's make sure everything's done by the book. And they both have valid points, right?
Which is what makes it so hard. So where do we go from here? Like, is there any way to make those two sides, those two impulses work together? can you have a fast response that's also, responsible?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And to be honest, there's no easy answer.
So we've gone deep here, no doubt. And it's easy to feel, I don't know, kind of overwhelmed. Like, what can you even DO when it's this complicated?
Oh, for sure. But that's why we do this, right? Knowledge is power, as they say. Understanding the system, the arguments, all of it. That's where change starts.
Right, right. You can't fix what you don't understand. What do you think, though, for our listeners? I mean, what's the takeaway here?
I think it comes down to this. It's not about taking sides. It's about asking the right questions, demanding better, and, never underestimate the power of making your voice heard.
Absolutely. Stay informed, keep those questions coming, and hold those elected officials accountable. What can folks do, though, besides just, reading the news? Yeah. Anything concrete?
Honestly, even just contacting your representatives, letting them know this matters to you, that makes a difference. Or supporting organizations doing the work on the ground,
Right.
where it counts.
Yeah, sometimes that direct action, that connection to the real people impacted, that's huge.
No doubt. And even just talking about it, with friends, family, that spreads awareness, gets people thinking.
Turning awareness into action. That's the goal, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what this deep dive into Johnson's interview showed us. Not easy answers, because frankly, there aren't any, but understanding the nuances, the different sides.
Exactly. And if it sparked something for you, if you're left with questions or you just want to get involved, that's a good thing. Don't let that go.
This whole Hurricane Helene situation, the FEMA debate, it's a reminder, isn't it? Disaster relief. It's never simple.
Never is.
Yeah.
It's about finding that balance, between getting things done fast and making sure they're done right, making sure help gets where it needs to go to the people who need it most.
It's a challenge, no doubt about it. But it's one we all share. And the more we know, the more we do, the better equipped we are to actually face it. So thanks for taking this deep dive with us. Stay curious, stay engaged, and keep those good questions coming.